Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to be here. It's a beautiful day, beautiful campus. We're really glad that we could join you for this conversation today about roles and responsibilities and issues that are possibly affecting our ability to do the best we can for students. So I'm going to let Scott give a word of welcome as well, and then we'd love to find out who's here today, so if there's a way to kind of go around and have folks introduce themselves just so we get a sense of who's here.
Well, it is nice to be back here. You know, you've been in the system longer. You actually know almost all these buildings. So, any place where there can be a meeting, I think I've been in now. It's nice to be back in this beautiful room. So, with that, let's. Did you want to just kind of pull administrators? Sure. So, board members. Keeping the Brown Act good here. No. Faculty. Okay. Classified staff. And most importantly, students. Great. Oh, did I skip it? Yeah. Oh. I'm in trouble now. Administrators. All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. And what we're going to do is start off with the presentation. This is a standard presentation that I've given a few dozen times and several times with Beth over the last year. The Academic Senate and the League developed this presentation, which hasn't changed much. So some of you may have seen it before, although every time we go through it, we have kind of revelations that do come about, oh, that's why this is the way it is or should be. It was understood that after the implementation of AB 1725, which I'll talk about, it was very important to have the two organizations representing the district governing boards and CEOs and the academic perspective of faculty at the statewide level. It was important to speak with one voice and provide one set of answers. And beyond this presentation, there are a lot more examples. I think they're both on our website and on the Academic Senate's website that you can dive into. We'll try and hold questions simply because we find that oftentimes the question is, oh, well, that's answered on the next slide. So let's try and get through. This presentation will be about an hour. Then we'll have a Q&A. We'll see how many of the issues. I know that there was one agenda that breaks out issues. We may be able to get through some of those just in the presentation, and we'll see, kind of have a check-in of where we are on answering those issues after that initial discussion following the presentation. So note that the slide title is Participating Effectively in District and College Governance. There is nothing known as shared governance in the law. We've always used participatory governance when talking about it because shared governance can lead to misinterpretations. For example, we couldn't share the governance on whether this room is too hot or too cold. We'd come up with different perspectives. We might delegate a committee, and somebody at the end of the day is going to have to make a decision. So even though, and even on, I think on one of the agendas, it says shared governance, we're going to be talking about, and we're going to be encouraging you to talk about participatory governance today, because it's about ensuring that those affected by decisions have an opportunity to participate in the decision-making process. So AB 1725, more generally, was not just about governance. It was a wholesale modernization of California's community colleges. You think back to our origin, where'd we come from? Where'd community colleges come from? The K-12 school districts. So we emerged from the K-12 school districts a little over 100 years ago when the legislature initially authorized K-12 districts to offer post-secondary education courses. Then we emerged as our own districts a couple of decades later. Then you had the master plan in 1960, the creation of the Board of Governors in 1967. Then we jump forward into the 1970s when you had the institution of collective bargaining, and then Prop 13 in 1978. Those major changes happened: the creation of a state board, the institution of collective bargaining, the taking away from local governing boards a lot of policy-making authority because of Prop 13. All of those policy changes happened, but the system was really still the system that emerged from the K-12 school districts way back at the beginning of the 20th century. And so there was a series of reports that said, you know what, this system grew. It's the workhorse of California public higher education. In the 1960s, we were already 2/3 of the public higher education students, a number that continues to approximately this day. But we hadn't really been modernized. And so that was what AB 1725 was really trying to do, was modernize California's community colleges. And if you look at the vote on AB 1725, which I know, at various points, different constituencies, use AB 1725 as a curse word, but recognize that the system reached agreement on this legislative package as reflected by the votes in the state legislature. In the assembly, 74-1. Those of you that remember Congressman Tom McClintock, now a congressman in Northern California, he was the one no vote in the state assembly, and the Senate 38-0. You don't see votes like that very often in Sacramento. There were 2 infusions of funding, and then the legislature kind of forgot about this law, which they should have been increasing our funding steadily toward the rate of student reimbursement that California State University gets. But the early 1990s recession really kind of ended that commitment of the legislature. The components of AB 1725, priorities in the mission. And I always have to somewhat giggle at this because anytime the legislature talks about priorities for community colleges, it's about, let's add more. They don't like to say, oh, focus, focus, focus. There's one debate going on about adult education right now, but in the general credit world, it's always adding more. The last was in the 1990s, adding on economic development as a top-tier mission. We saw this in the budget debate last few years where the legislature didn't say, get rid of recreational classes. They said, workload reduction should be in areas outside of transfer, basic skills, and career technical education. But AB 1725 did try to say that transfer, basic skills, and career technical were the top priorities. In governance, the state and local delineations, I talked about that creation of the State Board of Governors. That's when we split off from the State Board of Education. Well, not really until AB 1725 was it clear that the job of the State Board of Governors is to do as little as possible in terms of interfering with the operations of local districts. The language is, to the maximum extent feasible, responsibility should be left at the local level. Decision-making is what we'll be talking about mostly today. Program-based funding. If you ever want to take on a little research project or just want to read about the history, going back and looking at the bill, AB 1725, and I think FAC has it posted on their website, on its website, AB 1725, FAC, it'll probably pop up. But if you look back at what we were trying to do, it was really to improve the quality of education for our students, the quality of services. Stuff that we're finally getting back around to today. But if you look, program-based funding, the compact of the legislature, which they broke after 2 years, was you give us money, we're going to increase the percent of credit hours taught by full-time faculty. We're going to decrease the counselor-to-student ratio. We're going to increase the number of library books. All of those qualitative improvements were included in AB 1725, and unfortunately the legislature got distracted. For those of you that watch that movie Up, we talk about squirrel, and it's a joke we have in our office, like squirrel, that's kind of the legislature. They like bright, new, shiny things. And that's why we lost on that component of AB 1725, which I believe has set up some of the tensions that we have to this day. That the tensions that we find in the governance realm are a lot about that broken promise in terms of the investment the legislature was going to make in our colleges. related to faculty and staff, again, this is a professionalization. We're sick of being high schools with ashtrays. And so it was, how do we professionalize, make the quality, increase the quality of community colleges, but also answer the difficult to resolve question of, are we K-12 schools or are we higher education? And so we tried to find that sweet spot in between the two. We repealed the credentials, so no longer did you get a lifetime credential to teach at a community college like you did at a high school. Understand that more in line with higher education, it's about a realm of minimum qualifications that are set at the statewide level with some discretion left to the local level. Extension of tenure, creating a system of evaluation and peer review. If you think of the K-12 system, particularly at that time, it was about an administrator reviewing a teacher. And so we were moving more into a peer review system, which is similar to the traditional Western European university system that our university system is based on. Administrator contracts, allowing districts to engage administrators in longer-term contracts, and staff development and diversity goals. Why? Well, I already mentioned we want to take the ashtrays out of the high school. We wanted to be something different. Now, as with most reform efforts, we wanted to increase the support of the legislature for investing in the system. You don't get money for free in Sacramento or in Washington, D.C. You have to tell the legislature, this is what we're going to do. And AB 1725 created a very specific mechanism by which the quality would be improved through increased investment. I've already talked about moving from K-12 toward higher education, and we should probably change that word as I think about it, because I think we're proud of that in-between role that our community colleges have. Developing a more unified system that we can have 72 districts with 112 colleges, but we can also speak with one voice in Sacramento through our chancellor, who's hired by the Board of Governors. And this concept of institutional renewal, that these are living organisms that we constantly have to invest in their renewal, in professional development. One of the biggest shames in the last 10 years was the state walking away from investing in faculty and staff development, something we think that we may be able to get into this year's budget, and there's a bill moving through the legislature to renew that commitment, because you have to constantly upgrade the currency of both faculty and staff on the matters under which their responsibilities fall at the college. So let's move into governance. Participating effectively in district and college governance is shared involvement in the decision-making process. Participation, shared involvement, process. Very important words and phrases. Doesn't apply total agreement. Use my analogy of is it too hot or too cold in this room. You know, colleges will never have unanimity on any issue. You know, name an issue and you'll find somebody that has a different perspective, than other people. That's the nice thing about the diversity of our institutions. At different times, we're going to look to different people or constituencies in seeking that input, because it's about who is being affected by decisions. And at the end of the day, there is a final decision maker. Now, under state law, it is the local governing board. They're the fiduciary, and if you're a voter in the district, you know, that's who you are entrusting your tax money with. And so that's why the governing board at the end of the day has the final decision, although that decision can be delegated. It most frequently is delegated to the college president in a college like Pasadena, or a chancellor in the Los Angeles Community College District, but it can be delegated to other groups as well. It can be delegated to anybody. That's within the governing board's power and authority. Why do we have participatory governance? Well, these colleges have an immense wealth of knowledge and history in them. If I became a college president and I walked on campus, it would be pretty stupid of me to not seek out the history the wealth of knowledge that is on the campus. If I come in and say, and I had a friend do this, and he went on to be a very successful college president. He came in, and like his first weekend, he came in from out of state. Like me, he has a legal background. And he came in and said, well, best practice is to have all student services under one roof. And like he came out with like a memo the following Monday. Now, what you need to know about that college is there are ocean views from certain buildings. So sometimes it may not even be about what is in the best interest of students or the institution, but there is a history there. There was a seniority process as to where the departments went and those sorts of things. So knowing that and borrowing on that knowledge is huge. There's also subject matter knowledge. If we're going to do, let's say we're considering, and I don't know if you have smoking on campus or not, but let's say we're considering a smoking ban on campus, we've got a health, it'd be great to bring in people from our nursing department or other subject matters that are similar to that because they have a subject matter knowledge and would become effective spokespeople for the policy that we might develop. That's part of the commitment to implementation. If we're involved in a process, we can become champions of the decision made by the process. Now, this system of California's community colleges has over 500 senior administrative positions. And way back in AB 1725, it was known right away the best way to find the future leaders is to give them an opportunity to lead. And you do that through creating opportunities to lead in the decision-making process, committee membership, that sort of thing. Promotion of trust and cooperation. This is always a tough bullet point because oftentimes, like I know here, when we come down and do presentations, it may be because there have been some issues that have arisen and people say, oh, yeah, participatory governance creates trust and cooperation. Yeah, right, Scott. But you know what? I have found, even in the most difficult situations, that when people sit down and they talk about the values that they have, the goals, and then base the decision on it and realize, well, you know what? That makes sense. I understand at least they're coming at it as a human being and not, put some formula into a computer and it spit out something that I don't agree with. Talking about the values and having that conversation can advance trust. And sometimes, there's a simple answer to a problem, to a decision, but it's not found unless you have that conversation. Who's been part of a process at times in higher education where it came down to one word? Whenever we do, redoing mission statements of colleges, if you just have a war of memos, you're never going to come to resolution. You need to have a process where you can bring about that trust and cooperation and somebody says, oh, I got it, and we can resolve these challenges. And in doing so, in theory, there is less dissent. Well, it would be false of me to give the values without the challenges, because there are many. Okay, so the first time I was involved in participatory governance, I was a student at Orange Coast College. I was working as an EMT at Children's Hospital of Orange County, and I got involved in the student government. And the first committee I was asked to sit on was the Student Health Committee, because I was wearing scrubs, literally, because I just come from my shift. Well, the main subject matter of that first meeting was birth control for women. I'm not going to go into my personal background, but I wasn't all that experienced with birth control for women at that point. And so often you have these committee processes, and it's based on who is available, not who is best prepared to discuss the subject matter at hand. Everybody in this room has a full-time job. Students have full-time jobs. Being a student, being a family member, being a community member, board members have full-time jobs, even if they're retired. Part-time faculty have like 3 full-time jobs in many cases. And you have to understand that that's really difficult in trying to make decisions quickly in many cases when you have people that are having a hard time. We talk about calendaring the committee process to death or calendaring it to death. Here's an example. The legislature in the current is reviewing the budget right now, and there's $100 million for student equity in that budget. And it's tied to a student equity plan that has to be submitted like November 18th or something this fall. And I've been meeting with the Department of Finance on this issue, and we want that $100 million. It'd be great to help start making progress on that achievement gap. But I'm having to explain to them, well, the budget won't be done until mid-June. And then you really don't get the governance process starting again until mid-September. And developing a student equity plan inherently involves student policies related to student success. And so you have to go through a governance process. I don't think we can do it by November 15th or 18th. You know what? The people in Sacramento are kind of like, well, why not? And that's one of the challenges of this process. We rarely have a governance process that goes year-round. It can be very hard to align calendars, and it can require considerable time. Now, another challenge is shared accountability. Now, this is usually measured on the subject matter at hand. Everybody wants to be on the building committee when you pass a bond. Nobody wants to be on the budget committee in the last 5 years. Nobody wants to be responsible for those decisions that are made in those tough committees, the prioritization. Okay, the new faculty hiring committee may be a real popular one. The reduction one is not. The program consolidation one is not. Because I don't want to go back to my department and be responsible, which brings up another point, and that is, who am I when I'm involved in the governance process? Let's say I'm a political science faculty member. Any openings? Political science faculty member. I'm a member of the union, I'm a member of my department, and I'm a member of the academic senate. And I'm sent to a committee, and let's say it's on faculty hiring priorities. And I get there, who am I representing? Now, I'm representing the academic senate in that. If I was sent by the union and it was part of a negotiations process, then I would be representing the union. Who do I see most often? My colleagues in the political science department. And what do they want me to do? They may not have the same priority list that the academic senate has in whole. And that can be really difficult. What hat are you wearing at a given time? And at the end of the day, that decision is going to be made, and it may not be what the process led to or what you believed the process led to. And we'll talk more specifically, Beth will, about when the decision can be made outside of the recommendations, particularly on the 10+1 that Beth will talk about. There's one very important word on this slide, and that's goodwill. We're all here for one reason. The reason I'm here today, I got on a plane last night and came down, was for the students and community of Pasadena City College. Not for my paycheck. None of you should be in here for your paycheck or because you're angry, although you may be. The reason you're here is for the students and community this institution serves. And we've got to keep that in mind when we're trying to solve these educational problems. I used to say there are plenty of other jobs out there if you're not here for that reason. I stopped saying that the last few years. I guess things are picking up. I could start using that line again. But it's true. The reason you are at Pasadena City College is the students and communities served, each and every one of you. So in law, there are 3 tiers of law. You have the state constitution, that indelible document that we amend every election through the initiative process. But that's only amended by the voters, right? The state constitution. Then below that you have codes, like the Education Code, the Health and Safety Code, the Fish and Wildlife Code. That's where laws adopted by the legislature, and in some cases by the voters, but mainly laws adopted by the legislature are put. The Education Code is about this high if you have the annotated version. If you've got the unannotated version, it's about that thick in like really thin paper. Lots of laws in there. So in Education Code 70901 and 70902, you find the part of AB 1725 relating to participatory governance. And what it says is there are minimum standards. Included in the minimum standards is participatory governance. Does anybody know what a minimum standard is? That is the bar set by the State Board of Governors that says you can't fall below that and still get state funding. So this is actually a very important law that this process works and is implemented and used on our campuses. Also, other minimum standards are you have to get an annual audit, you have to maintain accreditation. And I pause on that word because the Board of Governors is not policing participatory governance. They're not going around saying, is this college, having, is everything going through the governance process? But the accrediting commission is. All of the standards, all of the detail of what Beth and I are talking about today are assumed to be incorporated into the accrediting commission standards. And, there were two main issues and remain to be two main issues at City College of San Francisco. One was financial and second was governance. I mean, it led to a lot of other collateral things, but the common themes all came down to those two. They've made a lot of great progress. Beth and I have been there a couple times. A lot of great progress on the governance piece, on making progress on the finance piece. But don't think that this is just kind of a nice process to have. It's not something that we do just because we want to do it. It's taken very seriously. So local boards have to provide policies that provide faculty, staff, and students the right to participate effectively, there's that phrase again, in district and college governance. And there's a special role for the academic senate to assume primary responsibility for making recommendations in the areas of curriculum and academic standards. That's the Education Code. One step below that is the Title V Code of Regulations. That's where regulations adopted by the Board of Governors, which go into further detail, are placed. And that's what Beth's going to start talking about now, because that's where you find the specific detail about that special role of academic senates. And then I'll come back and talk more generally about that faculty, staff, and students' right to participate effectively, that more generic first provision of AB 1725 governance.
Thanks, Scott, for that background and history. It's always interesting to find out where we've been so we know where we're going. I would love to also reiterate the importance of goodwill. I think there's nothing more important than knowing that everybody really wants to find a good solution to a problem when you're sitting down to try to find a solution. If we're all problem solvers at heart, which I hope we are as leaders and in our respective roles at the college, it's really crucial that we bring that sense that you want to find a solution to the table, because then the rules and the laws and everything else just give you the parameters within which you can find good solutions. So I hope we keep that at the forefront of what we're doing. So in the regulations then, we start to find out about academic senates. We are named in Ed Code as well as in Title V. So the governing board has to have some kind of policies for the delegation of authority and responsibilities to the academic senate. So let's find out what those academic and professional matters are, because they define that in the law and it's in Title V. So now let's talk about really some more specific information that helps us get out those roles. So these are commonly referred to as our 10+1. And so we'll go over the 10 and also the +1 and see a better scope of what's under the purview of the Senate. Clearly, degree and certificate requirements are there. If you're trying to put together a new program or what the standards are, the courses that are packaged together and a degree, all of that falls to the faculty. Curriculum, including the establishment of prerequisites and placing courses within disciplines. This is a huge process, and it's all under the purview of the faculty to develop the content of those courses, to figure out what the students need to have as skills before they get there. What kinds of knowledge and hands-on skills should they have before they take that next course in a sequence? And then placing courses in disciplines is that part of our curricular process that identifies which faculty have the right background to teach the content in this course. That's all based on faculty-to-faculty work and faculty understanding of what the MQs are in an area and what the content of a course requires. So this is very much within the purview of the faculty. Grading policies, again, whether you have a big process for how a student earns an incomplete in a course and then satisfies that incomplete, whether you have plus or minus grading and what those standards are and what those options are for faculty. All of that falls to faculty to determine and to set up regarding their colleagues and the options that their colleagues may have for determining student progress in a course. Educational program development falls to faculty. Now this one is kind of an interesting title because just about everything we do at the college is an educational program. So that means faculty are going to have a role in all kinds of program development at the campus. Not just an honors program, not just a distance ed program, but if you have a program for financial aid, you need to have faculty involvement in that because that's an educational program. So this idea that a program is strictly the geology program or the sociology program or your PE program is a little bit short-sighted in terms of what the faculty role is overall in an educational program development process. So I'm sure you can think of lots more examples of the types of programs that you have or that you might develop in the future, and faculty need to have a role in that at the very beginning in the development of those programs. Standards regarding student success and preparation also fall to faculty, and again, this is a big umbrella. There's a lot of stuff that falls under student preparation and student success. That could be everything from orientation and assessment to how students meet prerequisite requirements. It could fall to tutoring labs and, just everything on your campus may be involved in furthering student success. It should have some basis in furthering student success. So what is the faculty role in all of that? How does your academic senate become involved in those processes? And that link from a faculty member serving on a committee or a task force back to the Senate is also really crucial to define. So all of those ideas that fall under the Senate's purview really mean that they're under faculty purview, and the faculty has decided that they're going to work through their academic senate to make sure that those practices are approved and then communicated to the board or the board's designee in an appropriate way. So here's the rest of the 10. Number 6 is about district and college governance structures, especially related to the faculty role. So this is another place where faculty can be critically involved, and especially the academic senate. The Senate needs to be included if you're talking about shifting a governance structure and then looking for how that affects faculty. Now, faculty don't determine administrative structures, so let's be clear about that. But if you are affecting the way faculty might have to report to someone or how faculty structures may work in terms of just trying to facilitate communication and so on, it's really a good idea to talk to your academic senate about that. Get them involved, let them develop a plan, let them communicate how that might facilitate the best kind of communication and best reporting structure for faculty. Number 7 is faculty roles and involvement in accreditation processes, especially in the self-study development. And those annual reports, which are getting to be more of a headache, but at least, we know they're coming now. We can prepare for them a little bit better. But faculty need to have a role in that accreditation process. It's absolutely crucial that they're involved in 2 important ways. They need to have huge involvement on the campus, co-chairs of standards, co-chairs of editing teams, co-chairs for development of the process and the timelines for getting the self-study completed. But here's the other way that's really crucial for faculty to be involved in accreditation, and that is to have them participate on visiting teams. So not only participate at what happens here, but get out and go visit and be part of the peer review process at other places. And that means that faculty need to be recommended through the president's office, and they need to be supported when they go out on those visits through substitutes and whatever else may encourage their success when they're on visiting teams. So how those faculty roles in the accreditation process are delineated and established need to work through the Senate. Then policies for professional development also need to work through the Senate. This is a huge part of student success. Even if you didn't have the other list of student success options for participation by the Senate, faculty professional development alone is enough to engage the Senate. What are the opportunities? How are those going to be structured? What can the Senate do to provide that? What kind of opportunities do you have off campus as well as on campus? Now, there may be a role for the union here, too. Anybody here from the faculty union? Great. Thank you. For those of you that are union reps, there's some crossover sometimes. There's some opportunity to collaborate on these things because a union may negotiate how many days of professional development you need or hours or some other structures regarding professional development, but that content of it needs to fall to the academic senate because that is an academic and professional matter. Number 9, processes for program review fall to the academic senate. And this ties in with the other one in the first 5 about educational program development. Now on this part of the 10+1, you get the other part of program development, which is program assessment and program review. So while you have a huge scope of educational programs, that means your scope of program review has to match that. So if you don't have program review for your honors program, but that's a program that you have developed through your educational program development process, then you have a gap to close. Okay? If you have other programs that you've created, for example, your athletic program or something else, and that's an educational program, that's in the best interest of students and in particular student athletes, is there a program review process for that? Well, that should go through the academic senate as well. There needs to be a loop closed in terms of not only development, but review of programs. And then number 10 is one of the ones that is really very crucial in a number of instances because there's sometimes confusion about number 10. And this is the one where faculty and in particular academic senates are involved in creating the processes for planning and budgeting at the campus. This is really important. It's about developing processes for planning and budgeting. Planning and budgeting go together. So that's why they're teamed up in number 10. But there are a number of plans at your campus. How many plans can you guys think of that you have here? Think of one. What do you got? Student equity plan. Scott mentioned that one. What other plans you got? Student success plan. What else? Facilities plan. Educational master plan. Great. EEO plans, diversity plans, the old matric plans. You may have a plan to go out to get a new bond. You may have all kinds of plans, plans you even haven't thought of, a staffing plan. All of those plans need to have engagement of the Senate. Those processes are what the Senate can work on to help facilitate the engagement of faculty, the timeline. You know, are these plans all being accomplished during the summer? What gets done during the summer? What gets done during the academic year when the faculty are around and can be engaged? Who should be involved? How are those folks appointed to be involved? What does that planning process look like? What does that budget development process look like? It's really critical to remember that these are processes that we're creating through this participatory governance process. And then there's this category of +1. It's this kind of catch-all that if there are additional areas where faculty should be involved or it seems appropriate to delegate that work to faculty, the governing board can do that. So that +1 exists. Some colleges use it, some don't. It just kind of depends on what comes up, what situations arise, and how work may get delegated. Because all of this that we're talking about here is about appropriate roles and responsibilities. And if you get a better sense of the role and whose job it is and what their responsibilities are, then you get a better opportunity to actually accomplish some work and finish some projects and make some recommendations to the board at the end of the day. So what we're trying to figure out here is who gets to delegate to whom. So if the board would like to delegate more work to the Senate, and you guys already got 10, I don't know why you want 11, but you know, if the board wants to delegate more work to the Senate, they can. And then that would be something else for the Senate to work with the board on making those appropriate recommendations. So, question for all of you. One of the 10 areas of academic and professional matters is processes for institutional planning and budget development. Does this regulation relate to institutional plans and budgets themselves, or only to the process by which plans and budgets are developed for presentation to the board? So what does this refer to? And if it's not clear, we better make it clear. So which part is the faculty role? Being no one interested in jumping in on this, let's clarify. The faculty through the Senate get to help create the process. Okay, it's like the machine. They're creating the machine. You're going to put the inputs in here. You're going to crank it out during September and October. The recommendation's going to go to the Senate in January. At the end, by March, we're going to have this total recommendation. Okay, at that point, that recommendation goes to the next level. What happens beyond that point is in the hands of the board or the board's designee. The Senate does not get to decide what the outcome of the process is. What they get to do is develop the process and ensure that the process works. In fact, everybody on the campus has to help ensure the process works, whether you're a student or whether you're classified staff or the faculty or the board members. Everybody has to want that machine to function. It'd be like buying a car. Everybody agreed this was the right car to buy, but then the car doesn't work. Okay, then that doesn't help us at all. If we have a car that doesn't work, it's not going to be able to get us to the destination. So everybody has to agree to the process to make sure that we can get to the outcomes that need to go forward and become the recommendations to the board or the board's designee. So everybody got that? Because that's a big one. Lots of people around the state want to hold on to everybody's right to be involved in the outcome. And that's not necessarily where you hold on to it. You hold on to it through the process, the creation of the process and the fulfillment of being a participant in the process in the way it was designed.
Okay, what? Can you hold it, or is it really? Because we may get it. The next slide, there's more good stuff coming up. All right, so another part of the Title V regulations after the 10+1 were defined was that there had to be a way for the Senate to communicate with the board and for the board to understand how the recommendations were coming to them from the Senate. So the regulations define a concept called collegial consultation, or this idea that the board will consult collegially with the Senate, and there are two ways for this to occur. And these are defined in the regulations, so it's not like, you know, you guys could make this up at your place and we can do something different at my campus. We get two options. So the board can rely primarily upon the recommendations of the Senate in all of those 10+1 areas, or the board can reach mutual agreement with the Senate in all of those 10+1 areas. And what happens around the state is that boards have assigned rely primarily or mutual agreement in different ways to those 10+1. Sometimes the board says, we want to have mutual agreement on all of them. That's what's at my campus. The board said mutual agree on all 10+1. At other campuses, the board has said, we're going to rely primarily on the Senate for those first 4, and then all the rest we want to have mutual agreement. So the board can make that determination. So what is it here? What are you guys? Mutual agreement on all 10+1. Okay, good. Because that's an important foundation to understand that if that's what you guys have at this place, then you have already defined an important part of your participatory governance process in the 10+1 areas. So mutual agreement. Okay, so we'll stay focused on that. Okay, who decides which of the two processes in the regulations, rely primarily or mutual agreement? The board. And the board has already done that. You guys have a policy, yes, that defines all that? That's great. Really good to have a policy on that. I think CCLC has been a great advocate in that area for encouraging all the districts to make sure you have a policy. Must a local board select only one of those two options? No. You can do anything that works for you. So if in the future you decide that mutual agreement is something you'd like to revisit and maybe rely primarily on the Senate in some of those areas, you guys can do that. So I'm going to go through rely primarily quickly. You don't have that here, but just so that you understand what is occurring at other colleges and districts. So if you're talking to your colleagues around the state or your neighbors, they may have a different structure there. So you may not get the same kind of examples or models you might be looking for because of the way they're structured. So if the governing board has decided to rely primarily upon the Senate in all the 10+1 areas, then the recommendations of the Senate will normally be accepted. That happens pretty routinely. And they're only rejected when there are exceptional circumstances or for very compelling reasons. And that's another big part of rely primarily, is to understand what those exceptional circumstances may be when the board may have to reject a recommendation that comes from the Senate. And if the board decides not to accept that recommendation for those compelling reasons, then there needs to be something back to the Senate in writing about that, which only makes good sense because the Senate has done its due diligence in trying to help the board, and the board has now chosen not to accept that recommendation for what must be some very compelling reasons. Then that rationale needs to go back to the Senate. Now, if you have mutual agreement, which you all do, so let's go through this very carefully, make sure everybody has an understanding of what's in the regulation about mutual agreement, and that is that if agreement is not reached, then existing policy remains in effect, unless there's exposure to legal liability. So that would mean that the board would have to be get sued, or there's threat of a lawsuit or something for some legal liability, or some substantial fiscal hardship. Now, there were some very difficult fiscal times over the last few years, and so there were some very challenging decisions made, and it was very difficult in some districts, but there still should be a very good understanding about the fiscal situation before the Senate even gets involved in making a recommendation, or you try to reach mutual agreement. That should be part of the parameters right up front, that you can't be designing this kind of a building when the budget is only for this kind of a building. You know, don't set up the whole group to fail so that mutual agreement would have to be overridden. So if there are compelling fiscal reasons, and you know that ahead of time, please, please, please communicate. That's part of goodwill, coming to the table, wanting to find a solution given the parameters that you have. Now, if there's no policy in place and you're trying to come to some agreement because you need a new policy, then you want to make sure that you still try to reach mutual agreement. You do everything you can to get there, and you make that good faith effort first, but the board still may act for legal, fiscal, or organizational reasons in the event you didn't already have some kind of a policy in that area. So again, the more communication you can have up front, getting these groups to try to find agreement together, looking at all the ways they need to be involved, let's set them up for success. Let's not set them up for failure. That's what mutual agreement can be all about. And in some ways, I find mutual agreement very compelling as a way to go. You know, my colleagues that have rely primarily would say, well, Beth, don't you want them relying on the Senate in all these areas, relying on the faculty? Yeah, I do. But you know what makes this work so much better is when we all agree. And if we start out with that sense, we're going to try to get to a place where we all can agree on this. We're going to take a recommendation to the board that has everybody in agreement already. Phew! We've just saved ourselves a lot of heartache and, you know, challenges and so on. So I do find very compelling reasons for mutual agreement. Sometimes it's challenging because you do have to agree. But you guys, that's setting up an opportunity for success. So think about it that way. Think about, gosh, by the time we get this figured out, we're going to be able to send something to our board members, and they can feel so confident that everybody's already agreed. If the governing board chooses the option to rely primarily on the advice of the Academic Senate in any of the 10+1, is the board required to accept the recommendation of the Senate? No, not even when it has to rely primarily. There are still opportunities for the board not to have to accept the recommendation of the Senate, but it should be in very rare instances of legal or fiscal, very compelling reasons for that, and then it needs to be written and shared back with the Senate. So I think I just told you what exceptional circumstances were and compelling reasons. And so we'll go to the next one. All right, so here's mutual agreement. So this is for you guys. Your governing board chose mutual agreement, and that's supposed to mean you're going to reach a written agreement. And written agreement here is a really good word, the part written, not just a hallway agreement, but a written agreement with the Senate in any of the 10 defined areas of academic and professional matters. When may a board act if it is not able to reach mutual agreement with the Senate? Yeah, legal, fiscal, organizational, right? Those are the matters. But again, if we know that up front, that those are the parameters, then let's get our homework done and figure out how to come up with the best possible agreement we can get, given that those are that's the situation that we're in. Which is better for local senates, rely primarily or mutual agreement? Either one. They're both good, they both work. It just depends on your culture, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it is at the discretion of the board. The board is never prohibited from acting. So just so you know, they are the decision makers, and they have to make decisions at some point. That curriculum packet needs to be approved. Budgets have to be approved. Plans have to be approved. All of that stuff has to get done. The board has to make decisions. So figure out how to help the board be successful in doing its job. What is the best timeline for getting input, having resolutions through the Senate or review by committees so that you can get the information to the decision makers in a timely way so that they can do the job they need to do. That's going to help all of us be more successful. Exceptional circumstances and compelling reasons versus compelling legal, fiscal, or organizational reasons. To me, I see all of these as being kind of the same thing. If there are some reasons that are really going to be crucial to the outcome of this decision, then let's get that information ahead of time. If it's something new that's come up, because those things do happen, like you do all your due diligence, and then at the end there's something that kind of blindsides you, that can happen. Something could change. But for most of us, we know what's going to happen through the whole year. We know what the calendar year looks like. We know when the Senate's going to be meeting. Let's try to find a way to work within all of those parameters so that we don't get blindsided at the end, or somebody wants to just pull a trigger and say, well, for organizational reasons, we're not going to approve this. Well, we should have known what those organizational reasons were ahead of time, so that we could have figured that in, like you were thinking about a reorg, or you were going to downsize or upsize or whatever it may be. All of that stuff should be worked in. A couple other provisions for academic senates. Some of these are from Title V, and some of them are from Ed Code. And while Scott was mentioning the overall structure, the legal structure with the Constitution up here, you know, that's kind of the top. And then you have Ed Code under that umbrella. And then you have Title V under that umbrella. It's important to know that Title V has the weight of the law behind it because it comes from Ed Code. So that layer of law is really important to understand, that while some things are in Ed Code, we have important elements in Title V, and all of those are really crucial for us to follow. And underneath that comes your actual local district policies, because that's where you implement all of that law locally. So just keep that in mind too. Curriculum committee. You guys have a curriculum committee here? You already have one? Well, good. Then you don't have to worry about the first one, because you already have one. It's already been established by mutual agreement of your administration and your Senate. But if you were a new college coming about, then you would want to establish your curriculum committee this way, by meeting Title V requirements. Administrator retreat rights. This is something that's in the law part, the Ed Code part of our laws and regulations, which says that if administrators are going to be able to retreat to the classroom, that you need to be able to work that out with your academic senate. So that's an important feature of your roles, faculty roles and governance. And if you think about administrator retreat rights, then the Senate obviously needs to play a part in determining how that will happen and under what conditions and criteria and so on. Equivalencies to minimum qualifications. This too is in Ed Code, and faculty need to take the lead role in determining equivalencies to MQs. So if your faculty have not already been engaged in that equivalency process, I encourage them to do that ASAP, because you need to have all of that established. That is a faculty job to do. They're the ones screening those faculty hires. They're the ones setting up the job announcements and the how you meet minimum quals, and then any further qualifications that those candidates must have. So they have to be involved in determining equivalencies. Faculty hiring is the same thing. Any faculty hiring processes need to have the Senate engaged. The Senate has to determine what that process looks like for hiring faculty. Now, clearly there's going to be a role for EEO, or there's going to be a role for some other aspects of your structure in getting those people actually through the hiring process. But the faculty need to be engaged in that. What kind of interviews, what kind of materials do you want submitted, how are we going to prioritize which faculty we want to hire? All of that is a key role for the academic senate. Now, faculty wear two hats at all times. They're members of their senate in the overall sense of being represented by their senate, and they're also members of their union. Even though they're not serving as a union rep, they're still members of their union. So faculty wear two hats at all times. And sometimes it's hard to separate those two hats. Which one am I wearing today, and which part of my dual role as a Senate member and a union member is going to take precedence in this situation? So it's important for the Senate to work with the union, figure out which areas where they overlap or where there might be some gray area so that they can actually team up to come up with what's in the best interest of both sides of that faculty's work life, their working conditions, but their academic life as well. Those things overlap and so need to be agreed upon together. So there's all kinds of specific examples, but faculty evaluation and the tenure process are two big ones where we really need to see the Senate and the union work together. And hopefully that's happening here. There's some really wonderful models for that around the state, and the state Senate's been working on that as well. So I'm going to turn it back to Scott to let him talk a little bit more about the roles of others in participatory governance.
Before I get to that, jumping back to that previous slide, I realized that one of the things I usually talk about in the initial overview and talking about the history and AB 1725 coming about when it did, and I talked about Prop 13 and this reconciliation of, fewer decisions were able to be made by local governing boards. Similarly, on the collective bargaining piece, that we had to formalize the academic portion of policy development after collective bargaining was instituted in the 1970s, signed by then Governor Jerry Brown. We had to, because no longer could administrators or the board just sit down and have a casual conversation that might affect terms and conditions of employment. So a lot of, as Beth mentioned, a lot of the things that we talk about and a lot of the difficult issues I know you're facing here are in that overlap area. And that's one of the reasons that a formalized governance process was created to parallel that dealing with terms and conditions of employment. Now, if we jump back to that top level, that ed code, we talked, and the first provision was that faculty, staff, and students have the right to participate effectively. So that's kind of on those matters having a significant effect on them. So that's your starting point. So if you think about it, if we did a little flow chart, you start off and you say, does a decision have a significant effect on faculty, staff, and students? If yes, then we're going to enter the governance process. Then we look at 10+1 and say, is it a subject matter for collegial consultation, mutual agreement in your case? If yes, then we're going to look for a special role from the academic senate. If no, there's still kind of that question of, for faculty, staff, and students, does the decision being made have a significant effect on them? And I think some of the issues that you're facing might be on that point where you go and you say, well, that's not on 10+1, but we still have an obligation to seek input from faculty, staff, and students. And as I mentioned, for faculty, it would be through the academic senate. And we move on to staff. Now, the good news is we only have one slide on staff. The bad news is we only have one slide on staff. But this sets forth the general arrangement you would have both for faculty and staff in terms of the boards have an obligation, and the board has, adopt policies that provide staff the opportunity to participate effectively in district and college governance. And that's by developing recommendations that have or will have, or processes for jointly developing recommendations that have or will have a significant effect on staff. So first, who's a staff member of Pasadena City College? I think a lot more hands should go up, right? I mean, if every couple of weeks a check pops into your bank account, you think of yourself, well, hey, I'm a staff member. And that can create some confusion. Generally, we're talking about classified staff in this case. Now, there is a provision in law that says that when you are seeking input on a policy having a significant effect on staff, you first have to ask or give the opportunity to the exclusive representative, CSEA in many cases, to provide the feedback, usually the largest exclusive representative. Do you have a classified senate here? So And classified senates either work in parallel with the exclusive representative, or in many colleges, exclusive representative has delegated the classified senate on most issues that don't have terms and conditions. And in many cases, there's an overlap in leadership, and it works out okay. There was a period of time where there was, I think, more animosity between the two, but I think that when the legislature said the first priority has to be given to exclusive representatives, some of that animosity was reduced. And the reason is, in many cases, the rationale by which we determine that something has a significant effect on staff, it inherently is the affecting terms and conditions of employment. So if we say, does changing the withdrawal date have a significant effect on staff? Yes or no? Sure as hell do if you work in A&R. You know, they're like, well, we're going to get crushed and it's going to affect staffing and we need to add staff. Well, you can think, oh, wait, that also does affect terms and conditions of employment. So that's one of those we would understand. So we're going to add a new program. We're going to add a new international program with Brazil. Our soccer team had not such a great season last year. Does that have a significant effect on staff? Sure it does. What about adding going to plus and minus grading? That's one we probably would say, you know, there may be one computer person, programmer, but much of that is done off campus now. It probably doesn't have a significant effect on staff. Now, there's a word in here that is a challenging word, and that is reasonable. What is reasonable? It generally means there has to be given an opportunity to collect feedback. There needs to be some sense that that feedback has been considered. So an opportunity for the affected constituency to speak at a board meeting. It means that you can't simply, at a board meeting, add a new agenda item and say, staff, hey, Joe, you're the representative from CSE. Are you okay with this? That wouldn't be reasonable consideration because no individual that is a president or representative can make a reasonable response on the spot. And so, you know, Beth was talking about this and talking about the process and like heads up, and you know, so much of this is that going back to goodwill and thinking out ahead. It's about planning ahead and then tying back to your planning documents the decisions being made and getting general agreements that, okay, so we have budget ranges the next few years of, you know, adding 3%, 5%, 7%. We know what our faculty hiring priorities are going to be in advance. And on the other side, contingencies if things go downhill. And so we can come back to our agreements instead of having every decision be one that launches a whole new, you know, decision-making process. Does that make sense? So again, every reasonable consideration on those matters that have a significant effect on staff. Now for students, we have that same general provision, but we actually have a list. Now this can be confusing because this is not a collegial consultation list. This is not a mutual agreement list. This is an every reasonable consideration list. But in the regulatory process, and I frankly think it was just you know, the former CalSAC, which I was involved in, was long after I was, well, not that long after I was involved. I think they had a Me Too moment in the regulations development, and they said, well, the Academic Senate has a list. We want a list too. But it shows us some of the examples of those things having a significant effect on students, and it wouldn't be a surprise. Going to plus or minus grading has a significant effect on students. In fact, if you can see, those items that are red are overlap items with the Academic Senate's 10 plus 1. So the students have 9 plus 1 plus 1. The math people are going, yeah, he went to law school. You can but 9 plus 1 plus 1. So we have those 9 specific. We have 1 general as number 10. And there's a specific provision that says that students have the right to give input on policies and procedures pertaining to the hiring and evaluation of faculty, administration, and staff. Now, sometimes I see cringing, depending on relationship with student governments, I'll see cringing like, oh my God, we got to have like students on all of our peer review committees. That's not what this says. This is back to policies and procedures similar to the budget process as we talked about before. So how do we reconcile that? We just had that list. We have the overlap. So if something's 10 plus 1, do I have to listen to anybody else? Yeah. If it has a significant effect on staff or students, we're going to give staff and students every reasonable consideration. And frankly, if it's a mutual agree and we're using one of those exceptional circumstances, compelling legal, fiscal, organizational reasons, and the staff and students say, yeah, this is the right thing to do, and the Senate was a little uneasy with it, that might be a factor that the decision maker could use to say, yes, other people found this to be a compelling fiscal, legal, or organizational reason. But we do give greater weight to the academic senate. It is our obligation. So you would have to say, oh no, we totally get the Senate's position on this from an academic perspective. We're going in a different direction because we tried to reach mutual agreement. We didn't. But we're doing it for compelling fiscal, legal, organizational reasons over here. So you have to give greater weight to what the Senate perspective is. Do these regulations have the force of law? Well, we've talked about laws, the education code, regulations. I talked about minimum standards by which the Board of Governors can say, okay, we're going to have to turn off this funding spigot because you're not governing right. That's not going to happen. So what ends up happening? Well, I mentioned the accreditation issue, which, frankly, before City College of San Francisco, it was like, oh, it's in the standards, but they're never going to get down to that level. And then they got very specific down into that level and talked about CCSF had 55 committees and they couldn't really make any decisions. And that was used as one of the major reasons behind the revocation of accreditation, which is pending in the courts. So it does have a force of law. But what happens in trying to resolve it locally? And I know there's a question that many of you have asked. Well, the other possibility, you can write the chancellor's office, and some colleges have done it. The chancellor's office, number one, their legal department is a lot smaller than it used to, and I think that their ability to respond has just been significantly minimized. Colleges bring us in, we make written determinations sometimes, and in the worst case scenario, you end up in court. And let me just pause on a moment. I do know that you have a pending legal issue relating to the calendar. That is an issue that's being considered whether or not it's a collective bargaining issue, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to jump in because that's kind of a separate conversation than participatory governance. But what does happen is an academic senate could take, or the students, or the classified staff could take the college to court. And we have an example of that. And it's a good example because, frankly, it was a gray area issue. It was a college in Northern California, and they were switching from a faculty department chair structure to an academic dean structure. And the question was that on that bullet point that Beth talked about, was that governance roles for faculty? And frankly, it was somewhat of a gray area issue. The league wrote an amicus, they call amicus curiae briefs, a friend of the court brief when you get to the appellate level. We wrote one on the college's side. The academic senate wrote one on the other side. And frankly, it could have gone either way. And at the district court level, the judge found for the college. And then it went up to the appellate level. The academic senate president got a second mortgage on his house to help fund it. And at the end of the day, the court upheld the trial court ruling and found for the college. Nobody won anything, except for a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted money. a college president who was chased out of state, who incidentally was a past statewide academic senate president. And that's one of those things of like our roles change through our career. And we've seen this actually quite a bit over time, and going both ways. Sometimes, administrators go back to the classroom and become, some of the most challenging to the administration, and vice versa. So we have to solve these issues to the best of our ability on campus, because the penalty or the fix, if you will, to a violation of participatory governance in a courtroom is like a Brown Act violation. Okay, you didn't do this process right, go back and do it over again. You need a better paper trail. Because as Beth pointed out, at the end of the day, if it is an issue of significant importance to the college, and they can fit into that compelling legal, fiscal, organizational structure, as long as they've listened and kept a paper trail, then they can make the decision. And unless it's one of those major types of decisions, they don't end up in court. So it really is incumbent upon us to figure out how to solve these issues on campus. And it comes back to that goodwill and communications. I mentioned the Board of Governors. The Chancellor's office it's basically half the size it used to be, and so it's not stepping in and really kind of policing participatory governance on our campuses. You have a summary chart, and let me, before Simon runs out, let me just point out, I didn't cover on the issue of students. Who is the students? Who are the students that you're consulting with? So we know we have to, on staff, go to the exclusive representative. We know on faculty we're going to the academic senate. The students would be your student government, your ASB, ASG, not your student trustee. Your student trustee is there to be a board member from a student perspective. And in a case where you have a student trustee that's also student body president, which happens, you have to understand that they can't wear both those hats in the boardroom. So you can't say, okay, we're making a decision right now. Have students been consulted? No, students haven't been consulted. Well, Simon, how do you feel about this? I love plus and minus grading. That doesn't work, because if he was wearing both hats, he'd have an obligation to go back at least for one meeting with the student government to get input. So I know this is really small, but you do have it in your packets that are available. But we go back to that first tier in the education code, that faculty, staff, and students have the right to participate effectively. We enter into that flow chart. Does the decision have a significant effect on faculty, staff, and students? If yes, then that is going to go into the governance process. Then, is it an item that we find on 10+1 for the academic senate? If yes, then we go into collegial consultation. In Pasadena's case, mutual agreement. If no, then it has a significant effect, and we're going to seek out, we're going to deal with that through our normal college governance process, perhaps our college council, or some planning and budget council, one of those types of committees. And at the end of the day, and if that doesn't have, it's not 10+1, we're going to give every reasonable consideration to the decision being made. So with that, I think we have time to move into some Q&A.